Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 90 of the Strokecast. This week, it's going to be a solo show, and I want to talk about fatigue and sleep. And probably because I'm tired. It's past midnight now, and I probably should have been in bed a couple of hours ago, but I have always been a night owl throughout my entire life. It's just sort of the way I've been naturally wired. Left to my own devices, I'm often still up to 4 a.m. and getting up around noon. Of course, that doesn't really work these days, what with jobs and responsibilities and things that you need to get done just being available during the day. But that was sort of my typical pattern back in the pre-stroke days. Fatigue itself and sleep, it's one of the bigger issues that stroke survivors face. As you well know, if you are a stroke survivor, you find you need a lot more sleep, especially in the early days. You know, I hear questions on the internet about people complaining about how tired they are, or, commenting on their loved one who just had a stroke who's now sleeping, it seems, all the time, 18 hours a day in some cases, sometimes more. And it's worrying because it is so different. It's very different from what we expect. So people ask, do I sleep too much? Well, here's the thing about sleep and stroke and neuroplasticity. And I've talked about this before, but I really do want to emphasize this, that sleep is not about laziness. It's not about depression, although it could certainly be a symptom of that as well. Sleep is work. When we're sleeping, the brain is still working, and, we can sometimes see that manifest through dreams as the brain tries to process stuff. But the way I like to think of it is like this. When the Department of Transportation closes down the freeway at night, or closes down a certain number of lanes of the freeway at night for construction, they're not doing it to give the freeway a break. They're doing it so they can tear up the lanes, they can tear up the pavement, and lay down new pavement, and make new connections to on-ramps and off-ramps, and build new pathways for cars, because that's work that cannot be done during the day. It cannot be done while the road is open. I mean, sure, there's some prep work that can be done, there's some staging that can be done, but you actually have to close the freeway in order to do that construction. It's the same way with our brains. When we're going through recovery, and especially in those early days where the brain is sort of still in full panic and crisis mode, and, that first month after stroke where your brain is still swollen and pushing against your own skull and trying to rebuild connections and even just figure out what the problem is, it has to shut down in order to do that. You have to go to sleep. Because when we sleep, especially in those early days, that's when the brain can do the hard work of doing the repair. All the therapy that we do during the day, all the work that we do during the day is staging for the brain, is getting things ready so that the brain can actually go ahead and get rid of the trash and build new connections and build that wiring and try and come up with a solution to its new problem of dealing with all of that dead tissue. And the result of that is when we get enough sleep, it can help our recovery. But because there is so much that is needed, we end up being a lot more tired, and we really start to deal with the neurofatigue. Neurofatigue is a term I first heard from my physical therapist, Megan. What we would do is during physical therapy, I would, get into the parallel bars and take a few steps and then need to take a break. And it's because my leg was so tired from trying to do those initial steps. The muscles weren't tired, though. The muscles weren't doing all that much work. That was another problem. But the brain was doing a ton of work. It was screaming at those muscles, trying to get them to listen, but the connection was gone. You've got extra neurotransmitters flooding the area, trying to get that signal through. And eventually there's just so much there, so much noise from that order for action that nothing can happen. Nothing can get through. So you take a break for a few minutes, let some of that stuff clear out, and then you can try again. That little break, even if it's just a short break, isn't to allow the muscles to recover. It's to allow the brain to recover and the nervous system to recover, to try again and to establish those connections in a way so that the brain doesn't have to shout as loudly down the nervous system to try and engage those legs. The brain is working super hard in this time. And we don't think of what the brain does as work in the same way we do as our muscles when we're walking or running or lifting or writing or shoveling or whatever it is that we're doing. But really, the brain consumes, and don't quote me on this figure, but in the neighborhood of 20% of the body's energy just for thinking, just for firing those billions and billions of neural connections and making those thoughts and memories and emotions and making those orders to each and every part of our body. The brain burns a ton of energy in that. And when it's after stroke, the brain has to burn even more and more energy. We talk about a stroke cutting off the blood flow to part of the brain, either because it leaks out in a hemorrhage or because of a clot in an ischemic stroke. And we talk about how those cells die because they don't get enough oxygen as a result of the stroke. But it's not just the lack of oxygen that those cells are asphyxiating. It's a lack of glucose. It's a lack of the energy and the food that the blood carries to those brain cells. So they are starving during a stroke, and that's part of why they die. The brain constantly needs more and more of that energy. And when it's got the damage, and when it's trying to work harder and harder, it's going to require a lot more sleep. Another way to look at it is that we're all familiar with our cell phone batteries, how they tend to go down over the course of the day, naturally as we use them. And we can do things to sort of stretch that out, maybe dim the screen, maybe turn off the Bluetooth, or whatever it is to try and get a little more energy out of that. But we're used to our cell phone going from 90% to 80% to 70 to 60 to 50 and gradually all the way on down. It doesn't work the same way in the post-stroke brain and body, though. To begin with, we don't have that 100% max power. So we're already starting with, our cell phone battery will never be higher than 60% or 70% or something like that. And then when it goes down 60, 50, 40, 15, 5, 0. And you get these sudden drop-offs because the fatigue that comes as a result of something like stroke or TBI or any of these other similar conditions, it's not like being tired. It is just so completely and fundamentally different because it's not just the traditional body's need for sleep and brain's need to sleep, but it's an entirely different experience. Back in the pre-stroke days, I could go a long time without sleeping. I could go upwards of 30 plus hours if I needed to. It wasn't pleasant, but I could do it. And as I would get tired, I would know I could get another 2 to 8 hours out of myself if I needed to. The things I was doing would go more slowly, not as effectively, and I'd probably make more mistakes, but I could do it. I could continue to stretch that reserve out. Now, that reserve is gone. So when that fatigue hits, it's much more like hitting a wall. And once you hit that wall, you're done. You just have to go and sleep it off and go ahead and get that rest. The other thing that happens is as fatigue starts to happen before it hits quite that point, and especially over time, when you're not getting enough sleep over time, is that fatigue can knock back your recovery by a month or 6 months or more until you can get enough rest. In some respects, it's kind of the same way that alcohol consumption does it as well. It's sort of dialing back what you're able to do to where you were several months ago, or at least that's been my experience. So when I get really tired now, it may be like I'm now walking like I was 6 months ago, and my fingers work like they did 6 months ago instead of the way they did yesterday. You see, daily life requires brain cells now to do things that they were never meant to do. Plus, they still have to do their regular job. So they're doing their regular job while they're making up for that dead chunk of brain tissue in my head. And as I start to get fatigued, those cells, those neurons, pull back to their primary role. And when that happens, deficits can reassert themselves. And all sorts of things can drive that fatigue. Stress, lack of sleep, overexertion, doing stuff drives fatigue. Sensory input, too much sensory input for many folks also drives fatigue in a significant way. I know Seth talked about that a few months back on the episode. So there's lots of these different things that drive fatigue. We're burning energy faster than before. We have more things taking up that energy, and we have less energy to start with. And when it's gone, it is gone. One of the other things, when we talk about sleep as a solution, it is certainly a powerful solution, but it's important for sleep to be the right kind of sleep, as in quality sleep. In my case, my stroke also drove the diagnosis of my sleep apnea. And I've talked about this before. Sleep apnea is a condition where while you're sleeping, your airway closes off. And so you actually sort of start suffocating a little bit, and your body has to wake up a little bit to reopen that airway. It can be a problem. It's considered to be a condition when somebody has 5 instances of this happening in an hour, every hour. So, I mean, imagine that. Suddenly, you're going through the night, you're going through sleep, and 5 times in an hour, you can't breathe. Your oxygen levels are dropping. That's not good for the brain. Sleep apnea is severe when it reaches about 25 times an hour. And that means that at roughly every 2 minutes, you're having to wake up because you're suffocating, because your body is not drawing in the oxygen that the brain is going to need. When I had my sleep study done, it turned out I was experiencing these apnea instances 59 times an hour. Roughly once every minute, I was not breathing at night, and my body had to wake up partially in order to start getting that oxygen again. The thing is, stroke didn't cause it. In fact, the apnea may have in part led to my stroke. It certainly has been known to drive stroke as a condition. Sleep apnea also drives hypertension or high blood pressure. It drives obesity. It drives all of these different conditions. The way to treat it was to go on a CPAP machine, which is a machine that continually blows air into my nose throughout the night to keep my airway open so that I can actually go ahead and get a good night's sleep. Now, here's the thing. When I started using that machine, I started getting much better sleep because I was actually getting sleep. I mean, prior to getting the machine, every morning that I woke up groggy, just with this tremendous fog. And it takes a while to sort of clear that and get through the day. And, of course, in the early afternoons, then you get that huge wave of fatigue. And again, this was pre-stroke, but so I was still just getting tired. And the reason for that is that it turns out for probably good 30 years, maybe more, I was sleep deprived. I just was not getting good sleep for decades. And that's a problem. This past week, I actually decided to try sleeping without my CPAP machine just to see. Actually, it's because I think I was coming down with a slight cold, and so my nose was stuffed, so it's much less effective then. And it was just annoying me for some other reason. And what I found was that the next day that I woke up, first day without it in an extraordinarily long time, all of a sudden that fog was back. And I was like, oh, I remember this. This is not good. Because that night I hadn't gotten any quality sleep because apparently I was still suffocating multiple times an hour, once every minute or so. So the CPAP definitely makes a big difference. So getting that quality sleep is super important. If you want to learn more about sleep apnea, last year I had a former colleague of mine on the show who's also a stroke survivor, Kristen, and she has sleep apnea that is even significantly more severe than mine. And so we talked a lot about that. You can listen to that episode back at strokecast.com/Kristen. But it's amazing how skipping that for one night can lead to that grogginess at a time in my life where I really probably can't afford it because my brain, here we are more than 2 years out from the stroke and still going through that recovery, still building new functionality, getting to wiggle my fingers again, which means my brain is building those new connections still and rewiring those things and burning the energy to do it. So, with that in mind, where's my life today? Well, Cliff Ravenscraft, formerly known as the podcast Answer Man and now the host of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show, as he's become sort of a life coach, on his show, one of the things Cliff talks about on his show, and he talks about how this is not his concept, but life happens to us in seasons. And we have very busy seasons where there is a lot of stuff happening, and we have maybe quieter seasons where we can dedicate more time to our personal health or to our families or to whatever it is. And when you start thinking about work-life balance and balance of other things in your life in terms of seasons, it really starts to make a lot more sense. The pace something is at today doesn't have to be the pace it's going to be at always. Maybe it's just going to be a really intense 2, 3, 4 months. And then life can shift into a different gear. It can shift to a different season. Well, right now I am in a pretty hectic season. I'm a big fan of the show Hamilton, as I think is nearly everybody. And the big song in the, I believe it's in the second act, where he's going through the Federalist Papers and getting through that whole process, sort of the refrain, the chorus in there repeats again and again. Why do you write like you're running out of time? Why do you write like you're running out of time? Because he is so focused on creating content and creating material. Why do I write like I'm running out of time? It feels that way sometimes. And, not to be maudlin, but it's because I am. It's because we all are running out of time. I figure I've got, here I am. I'm 48 years old. I figure I've probably got, about another 100 years or so on this planet to go ahead and fully make my mark and create stuff. And nothing like having a stroke to go ahead and force that perspective a little bit more. There is so much I want to do. There's a million things I haven't done. Just you wait. Because there are so many amazing things out there to do and to see, and to make that happen, that means it's a very busy season of life. Well, right now I'm running 2 podcasts, running a support group, running a full-time job that has its own expiration date of roughly February of 2021 before I'll have to leave that role. A fantastic relationship with a fantastic girlfriend that I have to nourish that relationship, because you have to nourish every relationship. That's just the way it is. Looking at, where are we going to move, because we're going to have to secure new housing in the ridiculous Seattle housing market, which is its own challenge, while working on another side hustle, while working on an additional volunteer program. And I mean, there's a million things I haven't done. Just you wait. And to again quote Hamilton, and to follow up on continue in the Hamilton theme, I one of my favorite T-shirts is again another line from the show. Just like my country, I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. Because all of this stuff is all about, this is my shot, this is my chance to sort of make things happen. And what is going to happen? Well, I've got some ideas, but, the world is always throwing new things at you and new things to be ready for. And regardless, this is a really hectic season in life. And that I expect is probably going to go this way until probably about February or so, and then things will likely start to quiet down for a couple of reasons. But the problem is that I don't have the same energy resources that I used to. And occasionally things are starting to fall through the cracks in this season, where I don't get all the sleep I need. And mainly in the area of I'm not necessarily proactively following up on things like I feel I should. Instead, relying on people to always do their part and manage their expectations, which generally, in theory, should be all you need to do. But one of the lessons I try to live my life by, or one of the slogans I try to live my professional life by, is that the ball only gets dropped when I'm not there to catch it. And I'm not there to catch them all anymore. And that's something I need to go ahead and reevaluate and figure out, how am I going to manage that? Because I can't rely on just remembering to follow up. Because again, there are fewer neurons that I can bring into play. And that sometimes results in things like, this week we ended up having a support group meeting that had to cancel at the last minute. And it's super frustrating because I just so hate to disappoint folks when things like that happen. And that's going to make for a very interesting day tomorrow, as I try and, as I meet with folks who didn't get the email as I wait in the parking lot. Not looking forward to that, but, you do what you got to do. How do we manage this? Well, lists and notebooks help, but, what the big trick is to to-do lists and to notes, it's, you have to go back and read them. You have to go back and review those lists. You can have the best practices, but if you don't use the best practices and the strategies for accomplishing things in life and the tools you have for getting things done, those strategies and tools are useless if you don't implement them. So there's a lot of that. I have to just be a little more focused on reading my lists and relying on my lists, and sort of, in an airplane analogy, I have to be more willing to fly by my instruments than necessarily just fly by looking out the window. And then, of course, there's also cutting back on activities that I do mindlessly. I mean, do I really need to read that list on Facebook of the 50 most outrageous court cases that you will not believe? Ultimately, it comes down to discipline. It comes down to doing what I know that I need to do. And whether that's going to be managing lists, executing on those things, doing the follow-up, ultimately it's, I'm going to have to figure out what I can do less of. Obviously, February timeframe, I think things do lighten up for a couple of reasons, as I said. But until then, I got to just have the discipline to use my tools, use my instruments, and of course, get more sleep. So like the old saying goes, marketing guy, heal thyself. And that's what I'm going to have to do more of. So, when you're tired, go sleep, get the sleep. It makes a difference. There aren't a ton of perks to being a member of the Stroke Club, but socially acceptable naps is one of them. So, when you're done listening here, go back to bed and go take a nap. And that brings us to our hack of the week, courtesy of last week's guest, Jan Douglas.
The use of a simple chair. We talked about steps being a problem if there's no rail, and if there's just one, and I'm not talking about in a car, but in somebody's house where you go and they have a big step up to the front door and there's no handrail. I figured out that if I had our friend put a simple chair, like a kitchen chair, on that step as long as it was broad enough, and it usually was. I could sit on the chair, swing my legs around, stand up holding the chair for stability, then hold on to the side of the door to get myself in the house and repeat the process going out. So I do that all over the place, in restaurants, in people's houses, and anywhere you find yourself facing a step or even two, to go up or down safely, because you have the chair to hold on to, and you also can slide your legs off while you hold on to the chair and your cane and whatever else you have, and then get up safely.
That's a great idea. That's sort of, in some respects, it's functionally similar to using a transfer bench in the shower.
Absolutely. But everybody's got a chair.
Everybody's got a chair. Exactly.
Yes, right.
Exactly. To hear more from Jan, be sure to check out strokecast.com/awonderfulstrokeofluck. So what's your experience like with fatigue? Go ahead and let me know in the comments below, or shoot me an email, bill@strokecast.com. If you're on Instagram, there is a fantastic stroke community on Instagram. If you just follow the stroke hashtag all over Instagram, some fantastic things on there that I would definitely encourage you to go ahead and check out. And go ahead and follow me on there as well. Just go to strokecast.com/Instagram, and that'll take you right to my profile. And as I mentioned last week, if you have a stroke survivor run Etsy or similar shop online, go ahead and email me. I'd love to feature some of those as we get into the holiday season here in the US. And, of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.